My name is Chloe, and I am 28 years old. The scars on my back, now faded into thin, silvery lines, tell a story. It's the story of a cold October night when my brother Ethan whipped me with a leather belt until I collapsed on the cold concrete floor of our basement. When I woke up in a pool of my own blood, my mother whispered in my ear, "Be grateful we even feed you." Now I work with survivors of abuse, showing them that healing is possible and that justice lands harder than any belt. If you're watching this from a place where family means safety, please like and subscribe as I share how I found a justice stronger than any belt. Growing up in Willow Creek, an affluent suburb of Austin, Texas, my childhood looked perfect from the outside. After my biological father died in a car accident when I was just 4, my mother, Eleanor, remarried Richard when I was 6. Richard brought his own son, Ethan, into our lives. Ethan was 8 at the time, 2 years older than me. We moved into a beautiful 2-story colonial house with a white picket fence and a backyard that seemed enormous to my young eyes. Richard was a senior vice president at a regional bank, always dressed in crisply ironed suits and carrying a leather briefcase that smelled of important deals. My mother, once a working single mum, transformed into a devoted housewife almost overnight. The first few years were relatively normal. I remember Christmases with mountains of gifts, under a perfectly decorated tree, birthday parties with matching plates and napkins, and weekend trips to the family's lake house on Lake Travis, where Richard would win stuffed animals for both Ethan and me. Mum seemed happy, always smiling and telling her friends how lucky she was to have found Richard after the tragedy of losing my father. But beneath that perfect surface, small signs of trouble were already beginning to bubble up that I was too young to recognize. Richard had strict rules about everything. The house had to be spotless when he came home. Dinner had to be on the table at 6:30 p.m. sharp. Ethan and I had to maintain perfect A's in school. My mother had to account for every dollar she spent presenting receipts for Richard's review at the end of each week. "Your stepfather provides for us," Mum would say whenever I complained about the rigid structure. "We need to show our gratitude by keeping things exactly as he likes them." As the years passed, I watched Ethan transform from a relatively friendly stepbrother into someone else entirely. As he hit 14, Ethan adopted many of his father's mannerisms. He walked with the same rigid posture, spoke in the same clipped tones, and developed the same expectation that others should bend to his will. Richard seemed proud of this transformation, often clapping Ethan on the shoulder and saying things like, "That's my boy, tough, just like his old man." When I was 11 and Ethan was 13, I started to feel uneasy being alone with him. He would stare at me with a barely concealed anger if I reached for the TV remote or sat in what he considered his spot on the couch. He never hit me in those early years, but the threat of it seemed to hang in the air between us. "Don't be so sensitive," Mum would say if I mentioned feeling unsafe. Siblings have little squabbles. But it was more than squabbles, and deep down I think she knew it. I could see it in the way she would tense up when Richard criticized Ethan for being too soft with me. I could hear it in her forced cheerfulness as she intervened in our arguments before Richard could take notice. My mother had changed too. The woman who had once been my fierce protector as a single mum had become increasingly anxious and eager to please Richard. She stopped wearing the bright, colourful clothes she had always loved, opting for the muted tones Richard preferred. She cut her hair short because Richard mentioned offhandedly that he liked it that way. She stopped calling her friends from college because Richard thought they were too liberal and a bad influence. I remember one night when I was 13, I came downstairs for a glass of water and overheard Richard and my mother arguing in the kitchen. I couldn't make out the words, just his sharp, hissing whispers and her soft, pleading tones. The next morning, she wore a long-sleeved shirt despite the summer heat. As she reached for the cereal box, her sleeve slipped up, revealing a darkening bruise on her forearm. Our eyes met for a second, and I saw something I had never seen in my mother before, fear mixed with shame. "I ran into the door last night," she said, quickly, pulling her sleeve down. So clumsy of me. It was the first time I realized that what was happening in our home was not normal, not healthy, and certainly not safe. But like many children in abusive homes, I didn't have the words to name it and no idea how to escape. All I knew was that something was very wrong with the picture-perfect family we presented to the world. By the time Ethan turned 17, his behavior toward me had deteriorated from cold distance to active aggression. I was 13, awkward, and trying to navigate middle school while walking on eggshells at home. Ethan had become Richard's golden child, excelling in academics and serving as the star quarterback for the high school football team, a position of near royalty in Texas. His accomplishments were constantly trotted out in front of family friends as proof of Richard's superior parenting. The first serious incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I had my homework spread out all over the dining room table, working on an elaborate Texas history project, a detailed diorama of the Alamo, due the next day. Ethan came home from practice in a foul mood. His team had just lost a critical game. He glanced at my project and deliberately knocked it onto the floor. "The table is for eating, not for your stupid junk," he snapped, watching the little plastic soldiers and toothpick walls shatter and scatter under the china cabinet. "Mum said I could work here," I protested, kneeling to retrieve the broken pieces. Ethan leaned down, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "If you tell Mum or Dad about this, I'll make you regret it. No one would believe you anyway. I'm the good one. Remember, when I tried to tell my mother what had happened, she brushed my concerns aside. Siblings fight sometimes, Chloe. Ethan is under a lot of pressure with the college scouts coming to see him play. Just try to stay out of his way when he's stressed." That became my strategy. Avoid Ethan, avoid conflict, become invisible. But it's impossible to be completely invisible in your own home. Ethan always seemed to find a reason to be angry with me. If I took too long in the bathroom in the morning, if I breathed too loudly during a family movie, if I received a slightly higher grade than he did in English, the one subject he didn't dominate. Richard began delegating discipline to Ethan when he was away on business trips. "Ethan is the man of the house while I'm gone," he would announce before leaving. "I expect you both to listen to him." My mother would nod obediently, and I would feel a knot form in my stomach, knowing exactly what that meant. The first time Ethan physically hurt me was over something trivial. I had stayed after school for a study group and was 5 minutes late for my curfew. Ethan was waiting at the door, tapping his watch with exaggerated movements. "You're late," he said flatly. "By 5 minutes, the bus was delayed," I explained, trying to slip past him and head upstairs. He blocked my path and, without warning, slapped me hard across the face. The shock stunned me more than the pain. "Next time, be on time," he said calmly, as if he had just commented on the weather instead of striking his sister. I ran to my room, tears streaming down my face, my cheek burning. When my mother got home from her part-time job at the library, I showed her the red mark still visible on my face. "Oh, honey," she sighed. "You know how important punctuality is in this house. Just try to be more on time and these things won't happen." Her response hurt more than Ethan's slap. In that moment, I realized I was truly alone in my own home. I made one attempt to reach out to a teacher, Mrs. Albright, my school counsellor, who had noticed my withdrawal in class. "Things aren't so great at home," I ventured, not brave enough to say more. "Are you having trouble with your parents, Chloe?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "It's not my parents," I began, then stopped. How could I explain that my brother had appointed himself my personal tormentor with my parents' blessing? It sounded unbelievable, even to me. "You can tell me anything," Mrs. Albright assured me. But when I mentioned Ethan's name, her expression shifted. "Ethan Walker, he's one of our top students. Just yesterday he was helping out with the tutoring program for the younger kids." The doubt in her voice was palpable. Ethan had built a flawless reputation at school, charming teachers and friends alike. No one would believe he was capable of cruelty behind closed doors. I developed strategies for survival. I memorized everyone's schedules to minimize my time alone with Ethan. I completed my chores before I was asked. I studied relentlessly to maintain perfect grades, removing any cause for discipline. I became an expert at reading facial expressions and body language sensing when Richard was in a dangerous mood or when Ethan was looking for a place to unload his anger. The loneliness was crushing. I had few friends because I was never allowed to go to their houses, and I was too ashamed to invite anyone to mine. On Ethan's 17th birthday, Richard gave him an expensive leather belt, hand-tooled Texas cowhide, with a heavy silver buckle engraved with a lone star. "This is a man's belt," Richard declared proudly as Ethan unwrapped the gift. "Something of quality that will last for years." Ethan ran his fingers over the smooth surface of the leather, a slight smile playing on his lips. Richard clapped him on the shoulder and added, "Sometimes beautiful things can teach important lessons too." The way they exchanged a look sent a chill down my spine. It was as if they shared a secret understanding, one that excluded my mother and me, but somehow involved us. That belt would become a symbol of everything that was wrong in our family. Though I didn't know it then, I only knew that when Ethan threaded it through his belt loops the next morning, wearing it to school for the first time, I felt a sense of foreboding that made my hands tremble as I packed my lunch. It was a Friday night in late October, unseasonably cold for Austin at that time of year. Richard and my mother were at a charity gala for his bank, leaving Ethan in charge. At 17, he took this responsibility with a disturbing seriousness, pacing the kitchen in his pressed khakis and button-down shirt, checking his watch every few minutes, as if managing a corporate office, instead of watching his 13-year-old sister. "Mom left meatloaf in the fridge," he announced to me. "I expect the kitchen to be clean after you're done." I nodded silently, my eyes downcast as I had learned to do. Direct eye contact often triggered his anger, interpreted as a challenge rather than normal human interaction. I waited until he went upstairs before getting my food, my stomach growling after a long day at school where I had skipped lunch to finish an English essay. The meatloaf was still cold in the middle despite my best efforts to heat it properly. As I carried my plate to the table, my sock snagged on a rough spot on the vinyl floor matting. I stumbled, just barely catching my balance, but the plate tilted enough to send my glass of milk crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering glass seemed to echo through the entire house. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dropped to my knees, frantically gathering the shards of glass with trembling hands. A bead of blood welled up where a sharp edge had sliced my finger, but I barely noticed. All I could think was, "Clean it up before Ethan comes down. Clean it up before Ethan comes down." Too late. His footsteps thudded on the stairs, and then he was standing in the doorway, surveying the scene with cold, calculating eyes. "What did you do?" His voice was unnervingly calm. "It was an accident," I whispered, still kneeling amid the mess. "I'll clean it up right now." Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket, and my stomach clenched. "Dad needs to know about this." "Please," I begged. "It's just a glass. I'll buy a new one with my allowance." He ignored me, already dialing. I could hear Richard's voice answer that familiar tone of irritation when he was interrupted at an event. Ethan described the situation as if reporting a major catastrophe, not a broken glass, emphasizing my carelessness and disrespect for family property. I couldn't hear Richard's exact words, but Ethan's expression shifted from righteous anger to something darker, more satisfied. "Yes, sir, I understand. I'll handle it." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his eyes never leaving my face. "Dad says you need to be taught a lesson about responsibility and respect." Ice seemed to fill my veins. I knew what that meant in our family. I said I was sorry. "It won't happen again." "Get up," Ethan commanded, ignoring my apology. Down to the basement. The basement. The place where punishments happened because it was soundproofed by thick concrete walls. The place where Richard had installed a small home gym that no one used except as a venue for discipline, away from windows and neighbours. "Ethan, please." I tried one last time. "It was an accident." His hand shot out, grabbing my upper arm with a grip so tight I knew it would bruise. "Now, Chloe." He dragged me down the basement stairs, flipping on the harsh fluorescent lights that made the space feel like an interrogation room. The weight bench sat in the centre, a grim throne for what was to come. "Bend over the bench," he instructed, his voice as detached as if he were a technician performing a routine procedure. When I hesitated, frozen with fear, he shoved me hard toward it. "Dad said I should use whatever means are necessary to make sure you learn this lesson." I heard the soft slide of leather as he unbuckled his belt, the one Richard had given him for his birthday. The sound sent a jolt of pure panic through me. Ethan had hit me before with his open hand, and once with a wooden spoon, but never with a belt. Never with that belt. "This is for your own good," he said, parroting Richard's favourite line. "Count out loud." The first lash came down across my back with a force that stole my breath. The leather bit through my thin t-shirt, searing my skin like a branding iron. "One!" I gasped, tears already streaming down my cheeks. The second came faster, harder, landing a little lower than the first. "Two!" I choked out. By the fifth strike, I was sobbing. My knees threatened to buckle. By the eighth, I could feel something warm and wet soaking through my shirt. Blood. He was making me bleed. "Ethan, stop!" I begged. "You're hurting me." "Weak," he spat. "Just like Mum. No wonder Dad says you'll never amount to anything." The next blow landed with even greater force, as if my pain fueled him. Instead of appeasing him, I lost the ability to count somewhere around 12. My vision swam, my consciousness flickering like a dying bulb. The last thing I remembered before I collapsed was Ethan's voice, distant and cold. "Get up. We're not done." But I couldn't get up. My body had reached its limit, shutting down to protect me from the pain I could no longer bear. I slumped forward over the bench, the darkness taking me as a mercy. When I came to, I was still in the basement, but my mother was there now, her face a pale mask of shock as she helped me to a sitting position. "What were you thinking, provoking him like that?" she whispered, though I had done nothing to provoke such violence. "Mum!" I rasped, my throat raw from crying. "He hurt me really bad." She glanced nervously toward the stairs, checking if Richard or Ethan might hear. "You know how important this dinner was to your father. Now, he had to come home early because of your behaviour." I stared at her in disbelief, my back a landscape of agony, feeling the dampness of blood through my shirt. My behaviour, I dropped a glass by accident. Her face hardened in a way I had come to recognise the look she put on when she was choosing Richard over me. "Why can't you just behave, be grateful we even feed you? Give you a roof over your head. Some kids have nothing." Those words cut deeper than the belt. "Be grateful we even feed you." As if providing the basic necessities for your child was an act of extraordinary charity rather than a parent's minimum responsibility. She helped me upstairs but offered no treatment for my wounds or a call to a doctor. Instead, she retreated to her bedroom where Richard was changing out of his tuxedo, leaving me to stumble into the bathroom alone. I locked the door and slowly, painfully peeled off my ruined shirt. The mirror reflected what Ethan had done. Angry red welts crisscrossed my back. A few had broken open and were bleeding. The imprint of the belt's edge was visible in some places, the skin already darkening into bruises around the cuts. As I stood there, staring at the physical evidence of my family's cruelty, something inside me hardened. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't love. This was a boss, pure and simple, and somehow I had to find a way out before the next time killed me. The next morning, I carefully dressed for school, pulling a loose sweatshirt over a soft cotton t-shirt to avoid scraping the raw wounds on my back. Every movement was an agony, but I was determined to go. Home had become a prison. School was my only refuge. Richard and Ethan had left early for a father-son fishing trip. Their absence was a small reprieve. My mother barely looked at me over breakfast, guilt and shame evident in her averted eyes. She didn't ask how I was feeling or offer any medical care. "I packed you a lunch," was all she said as I headed for the door. At school, I moved through the morning in a haze of pain and exhaustion. Sitting in the hard plastic chairs was torture. The pressure on my back sent fresh waves of pain with every shift in position. By fourth period, I was fighting back tears, my concentration shattered. Then came PE, the one class I couldn't fake my way through, the one class that required changing in front of others. Chloe, Mrs. Thompson, our gym teacher, called as I tried to slip past her without changing. "You know the rules, proper gym uniform or it affects your grade." "I don't feel well." I tried, clutching my books to my chest like a shield. "Can I please just sit this one out?" She looked closely at my face, noticing the dark circles under my eyes, the pallor of my skin. "Come into my office for a minute." In her small office adjacent to the locker room, Mrs. Thompson gestured for me to sit. "This is the third time this month you've asked to sit out. Is everything okay?" Something in her genuine concern broke the dam I had built around my emotions. The tears spilled over before I could stop them. "I can't change," I whispered. "My back." Her expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Are you hurt? Did something happen?" I hesitated, years of keeping the family secret warring with my desperate need for help. "If I show you, will you promise not to tell anyone?" A childish request, one no responsible adult could possibly honour. Mrs. Thompson knelt beside my chair, her voice gentle but firm. "Chloe, if you are hurt, I need to help you, and that might mean involving other people who can make sure you're safe." In that moment, I made the decision that would change everything. I turned my back to her and slowly lifted the back of my sweatshirt, then my t-shirt, revealing what Ethan had done. I heard Mrs. Thompson's sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God, Chloe! Who did this to you?" "My brother." I admitted the words, feeling foreign after so many years of silence. "Last night, because I broke a glass." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Mrs. Thompson immediately took me to the school nurse, who documented my injuries with clinical efficiency, her face a grim mask as she took pictures of the welts and cuts. The principal was called then Child Protective Services. A social worker arrived, her voice soft, but her questions direct. Had this happened before? Was anyone else home when it happened? Did your parents know about these injuries? Do you feel safe going home today? To that last question, I finally spoke the truth. I had been hiding even from myself. "No, I don't feel safe there at all." I was taken to the hospital for a full medical examination. The doctor, a kind woman with salt and pepper hair, cleaned and dressed my wounds, while explaining that some of the cuts would likely leave permanent scars. "These injuries are not consistent with reasonable discipline," she stated for the record. "This is abuse." The word hung in the sterile air of the exam room. Abuse, a label for what I had been enduring for years. A validation that what happened in our house was not normal, not acceptable, not my fault. While I was at the hospital, my parents and Ethan were contacted by the authorities. Their reaction was predictable: denial, minimization, blame. "Chloe has always had a flair for the dramatic," Richard told the social worker, according to the reports I would later see. "She's going through a difficult phase acting out for attention." My mother echoed his claims, though witnesses noted she seemed nervous, her eyes constantly flicking to Richard for approval. "We've always been a loving family. I can't imagine how this could have happened." Ethan, coached by Richard, presented himself as a responsible older brother, reluctantly tasked with reasonable discipline. "She was being disrespectful and destructive," he claimed. "I only gave her a light punishment as my father requested. She must have hurt herself worse afterward to make it look bad." But the medical evidence told a different story. The pattern of injuries was consistent with repeated blows from a belt delivered with significant force. The doctor estimated it would have taken at least 15 to 20 strikes to cause that level of damage. That night, instead of returning to the house with the white picket fence, I was taken to a temporary foster care placement. The Diazes were experienced foster parents who specialized in emergency cases. Their home was modest but warm, with clear rules posted on the refrigerator and soft blankets on every sofa. "You're safe here, Mrs." Diaz assured me, as she showed me to a small bedroom with pale blue walls. "No one is going to hurt you in this house." It was the first time in years I fell asleep without a knot of fear gnawing at my stomach. The legal process moved slowly. I was assigned a guardian ad litem named Sarah, a lawyer whose sole job was to represent my best interests in court. She explained every step as we went patient with my questions and my fears. "Will I have to see them in court?" I asked during one of our meetings. "Unfortunately, yes," Sarah admitted, "but I will be right there beside you, and you will be perfectly safe." Richard hired an expensive attorney who specialized in family law cases. They fought the emergency custody order vigorously, presenting character witnesses to attest to what a pillar of the community Richard was. How Ethan was an honor student, headed for a prestigious university, how my mother volunteered at church. The pressure to recant my story was immense. Phone calls came from relatives I barely knew, pleading with me to stop tearing the family apart. Letters arrived from church members suggesting I had misunderstood what had happened. Richard's lawyer built a narrative of me as a rebellious teenager, making false accusations for attention. There were moments when I almost gave up. The weight of standing against my entire family of being painted as a liar and a troublemaker felt too heavy to bear. But then I would catch a glimpse of my back in the mirror, the healing wounds that would become permanent scars, and my resolve would harden. Mrs. Thompson visited me at the Diaz home, bringing homework and news from school. "I am so proud of you," she told me. "What you are doing takes incredible courage." Sarah prepared me meticulously for the court hearing, explaining what would happen, how to answer questions truthfully but concisely, how to stay calm if Ethan or Richard tried to intimidate me with looks or gestures. "Just tell the truth," she advised. "That's all you have to do. The truth is on your side." As the court date approached, my nightmares intensified. I would wake up gasping, feeling phantom lashes of the belt on my back. Mrs. Diaz would bring me warm milk and sit with me until I could fall back asleep, never pushing, never asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. The day before we were due in court, Sarah called with unexpected news. "The prosecutor wants to amend the charges to include your stepfather," she explained. "Based on your brother's history and the severity of your injuries, they believe Richard directed this abuse and is equally responsible." It was the first time I allowed myself to hope that justice might actually be possible, that the court might see past the perfect family facade to the darkness that had almost destroyed me. The juvenile courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, nothing like the grand courtrooms shown in television dramas. The wood-panelled walls gave it a sombre air, the seal of the state of Texas hanging prominently behind the judge's bench. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet space, the scratch of a pen on paper, the rustle of documents being passed between lawyers, the creak of a chair as someone shifted their weight. I sat next to Sarah, trying to keep my breathing even as she had taught me. "Don't look at them until you have to," she had advised. "Focus on the judge or on me." But I couldn't help but steal a quick glance to my right, where Richard, my mother, and Ethan sat with their lawyer. Richard looked as impeccable as ever, his suit crisp, his expression controlled. My mother looked smaller somehow, hunched over as if trying to disappear, and Ethan, wearing a navy blue blazer that made him look older than his 17 years, stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. The hearing began with opening statements. The prosecutor, a woman with silver-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense demeanour, laid out the case against Ethan and now Richard. What happened to Chloe Walker was not discipline, she stated flatly. It was a brutal assault that left a 13-year-old child unconscious and bleeding. The evidence will show this was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of abuse condoned and encouraged by the adults who were supposed to protect her. Richard's lawyer countered with the narrative they had constructed. I was a rebellious teen making exaggerated claims. Ethan was a model young man who had administered appropriate discipline as directed by his father. Any injuries were either accidental or self-inflicted afterward. The Walkers are a respected family, he concluded smoothly. To tear this family apart based on the allegations of an admittedly difficult child would be a grave injustice. When it was my turn to testify, Sarah squeezed my hand for reassurance before I took the stand. The oath to tell the truth felt momentous, a promise to myself as much as to the court. I began with the night of the beating, describing in detail what had happened. The prosecutor gently guided me through my testimony, asking clarifying questions when needed, giving me time when my voice faltered. "And what did your mother say when she saw your injuries?" she asked. "She told me to be grateful they even fed me," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. She said, "Some kids have nothing." A small murmur went through the courtroom, at this quickly silenced by the judge. When Richard's lawyer cross-examined me, his approach was calculated to undermine my credibility. He brought up minor disciplinary issues at school times. I had talked back to a teacher or been reprimanded for talking in class. He questioned why I hadn't reported the earlier incidents, implying that I was lying about a pattern of abuse. "Isn't it true," he suggested, "that you were angry about being disciplined for breaking a family rule, and you exaggerated what happened to get attention?" "No," I replied, looking directly at him. "I dropped a glass by accident. My brother beat me with a belt until I passed out. That is the truth." Other witnesses followed. Mrs. Thompson testified about discovering my injuries, her voice catching slightly as she described my reluctance to change for gym, my fear of anyone finding out. The school nurse and the hospital doctor presented the medical evidence, their clinical descriptions somehow more damning than any emotional testimony could be. The doctor walked through the photographs of my injuries, which were displayed on a screen visible to the judge and the lawyers. "These wounds," the doctor stated, "are consistent with repeated blows from a narrow, hard object like a belt. The force required to create these injuries is well beyond what could be considered reasonable corporal punishment. Several of the lacerations required medical glue to close, and some will result in permanent scarring. As the images appeared on the screen, the courtroom was completely silent. Even Richard's lawyer stopped taking notes, his pen hovering motionlessly over his legal pad. I didn't have to see the photos. I had lived the reality they documented. Instead, I watched the faces of those who were seeing them for the first time, shock, disbelief, horror. The social worker who had interviewed Ethan testified next, reporting that while he was initially defensive, he had made disturbing statements during their conversation. When questioned about the severity of the beating, Ethan Walker stated, and I quote, "She needed to learn respect the same way I did. When I asked him to clarify what that meant, he refused to elaborate." Richard's lawyer objected multiple times during this testimony, but the judge allowed it to continue, ruling that Ethan's statements were relevant to determining the family dynamic. Then came the moment I had been dreading: Ethan's testimony. He took the stand with the confidence of someone who had always been believed, always been favoured. But that confidence began to fray under the prosecutor's methodical questioning. "Did you strike your sister with a belt on the night in question?" she asked bluntly. "I administered appropriate discipline as directed by my father," Ethan replied, using the rehearsed language Richard's lawyer had clearly supplied. "How many times did you strike her with the belt?" Ethan hesitated. "I don't recall the exact number." "Was it more than 5 times?" "Maybe." "More than 10?" Another pause. It was what was necessary to ensure she learned her lesson. Did you stop when you saw she was bleeding? Ethan's composure was slipping. I didn't notice any blood. Did you stop when she lost consciousness? His eyes flicked toward Richard, a search for guidance. She was being dramatic. I thought she was faking. The prosecutor produced the belt sealed in an evidence bag. Is this the belt you used? Ethan nodded, then verbally confirmed when reminded that his nod wouldn't be recorded. Your father gave you this belt for your birthday, correct? Yes. And did he instruct you on how to use it for discipline? The question hung in the air for a long moment. Ethan's eyes sought out his father's again. Whatever he saw there must have rattled him because he hesitated, clearly uncertain. Ethan, the prosecutor pressed, did your father ever use this belt or another one to discipline you? Objection. Richard's lawyer was on his feet. Goes to a pattern of behaviour and family dynamics, Your Honour, the prosecutor countered. Overruled, the judge decided. The witness will answer. Ethan seemed to deflate a little, his rehearsed answers no longer sufficient. Yes, he finally admitted. My father believes in strict discipline. Did he ever strike you hard enough to draw blood? Another long pause. Sometimes accidents happen during discipline. Did your father instruct you to discipline Chloe in the same way he disciplined you? He said I should make sure she learned respect, Ethan answered, his voice barely audible. He said sometimes pain is the only teacher that works. A ripple went through the courtroom. Richard's jaw tightened visibly. My mother covered her face with her hand. Justice, like a gavel, was beginning to fall in slow, steady beats. The most shocking testimony came from my mother. When called by the prosecution, she walked to the stand with small, uncertain steps, avoiding everyone's gaze. As she was sworn in, her voice was so faint the clerk had to ask her to repeat the oath. At first, she stuck to the family's story, claiming she had been unaware of the severity of what happened until she found me in the basement. And what did you do when you found your daughter unconscious and bleeding? The prosecutor asked. I helped her upstairs, my mother answered. Did you seek medical attention for her? No. Why not? My mother glanced at Richard, then down at her hands, which were twisting together in her lap. Richard said it wasn't necessary. The prosecutor continued gently. Mrs. Walker, has Richard ever used physical discipline on you? Richard's lawyer was on his feet, immediately objecting, but he was again overruled. My mother sat in silence for so long, I thought she was going to refuse to answer. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. For the record, Mrs. Walker, has your husband physically assaulted you? Yes. The word seemed to take all the strength from her. For how long? Her voice gained a tiny bit of strength. Since the first year of our marriage. 8 years. Were you afraid of what might happen if you sought help for Chloe after this incident? Yes. Tears were now streaming down her cheeks. Richard said it would ruin our family, that Ethan would lose his chance at college, that I would lose everything. So you told your injured daughter to be grateful she was being fed. My mother looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. I was wrong, she said clearly. I was horribly, terribly wrong, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. The judge called a short recess after my mother's testimony. When the hearing resumed, Richard took the stand. His demeanour was still controlled, but now there was a hint of desperation. He denied directing Ethan to beat me, so brutally claimed any injuries were unintentional, and tried to paint himself as a strict but loving father. But the evidence had piled too high, too irrefutably. The medical records, the testimony from school officials, Ethan's admissions about Richard's methods of discipline, and finally my mother's confirmation of her own abuse, all built a case that his smooth denials could not break. When the judge delivered her ruling, her voice was grim with barely suppressed anger. The evidence in this case reveals not just a single incident of excessive punishment, but a family where violence was systematically used to control and intimidate. This home, under Mr. Walker's leadership, became a toxic environment, the very antithesis of what a family should be. She ordered Ethan to a juvenile detention facility with mandatory therapy, a surprisingly severe consequence for a first-time offender with his academic record. Richard was charged with child endangerment and domestic battery with criminal proceedings to follow in adult court. My mother was ordered to attend parenting classes and therapy with supervised visitation to be re-evaluated in 6 months. Most importantly for me, I was to remain in foster care with a long-term placement to be arranged pending further evaluation. As the bailiff led Ethan away, he turned and looked at me once. In his eyes I saw confusion and the first flicker of something that, with time and therapy, might one day become remorse. Richard stared straight ahead, his perfect facade finally shattered, and my mother, after a whispered conversation with her newly appointed lawyer, approached Sarah and asked if she could speak to me privately at some point. "That will be up to Chloe," Sarah replied, her hand protectively on my shoulder. I didn't answer then. I was too overwhelmed by what had just happened, by the public acknowledgement of what I had endured, by the validation that I was not wrong or weak or deserving of the abuse. Justice had finally spoken, and its voice was louder than my fear. 2 weeks after the hearing, I moved from the Diaz's temporary placement to a longer-term foster home. The Millers, a coincidence of name that initially made me uneasy, had been foster parents for over 15 years. They lived in a modest ranch-style house in a quiet neighborhood about 30 minutes from my school, allowing me to continue my education without disruption. Carol and Robert Miller were in their 50s, their own children grown, and they seemed to have a bottomless reserve of patience. Their house ran on clear but gentle principles: respect for privacy, open communication, and natural consequences instead of punishment. The first time I accidentally broke a glass while washing dishes, I had a full-blown panic attack, certain that some form of retribution was coming despite their assurances. "Chloe," Carol said, kneeling beside me as I frantically tried to gather the ceramic shards with trembling hands. "It's okay. Accidents happen. They happen to everyone. No one gets punished for accidents in this house." It took weeks for me to truly believe her before I stopped flinching at sudden movements or constantly apologizing for minor infractions of rules that existed only in my mind. My healing was psychological as much as physical. The welts and cuts on my back slowly faded into scars, pinkish lines that would eventually turn silver with time. The wounds to my sense of safety and trust took longer to address. Twice a week, I attended therapy sessions with Dr. Rivera, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. At first, I sat in silence during our appointments, unwilling to revisit the pain I had just escaped. "We can just sit here," Dr. Rivera offered during our third session after 30 minutes of my stubborn silence. "There's no rush. Healing happens on your timeline, not mine." Something in her lack of pressure broke my resolve. "Do you have any idea what it's like?" I finally asked. "To be afraid in your own home, to have to calculate every word, every move, because one mistake could trigger violence." "I don't personally," she answered honestly, "but I have worked with many young people who have, and I believe you." Those 3 words, "I believe you," became a lifeline. After years of having my reality denied or minimized, being believed was revolutionary. Slowly, I began to share more. The constant anxiety, the hyper-vigilance that had become second nature, the nightmares that still plagued me. Dr. Rivera taught me coping mechanisms for when panic threatened to overwhelm me, grounding techniques to bring me back to the present, when memories pulled me into the past, breathing exercises to calm my racing heart when triggers appeared unexpectedly. School became a sanctuary rather than just an escape. Without the constant stress of my home life, I discovered I actually enjoyed learning. My grades improved from above average to excellent. My English teacher, Mrs. Peterson, noticed my talent for writing and encouraged me to join the school's literary magazine. "You have a powerful voice, Chloe," she told me, after reading a poem I wrote about finding strength in broken places. "Your words could help others who feel voiceless." The Millers expanded my understanding of what a family could be. Dinner wasn't a tense performance of perfection, but a relaxed gathering where everyone talked about their day, including the frustrations and failures, along with the successes. Disagreements still happened, but they were resolved through conversation, not intimidation. When Robert and Carol occasionally argued, they did so respectfully without name-calling or threats, and always came to a resolution. "Healthy conflict is normal," Carol explained when she noticed my anxiety during one such discussion. "It's how we handle it that matters." 6 months after I came to live with the Millers, my social worker brought news of Ethan. He had been participating in an intensive therapy program at the juvenile facility, addressing not only his behavior toward me, but the abuse he himself had suffered. "He has asked if you would consider receiving a letter from him," the social worker explained. "You are under no obligation to agree." I considered the request carefully, discussing it with both Dr. Rivera and the Millers. "What should I do?" I asked Carol one evening. "I can't tell you what to do," she replied, "but I can tell you that whatever you decide, we will support you. Your healing is the priority." After 2 weeks of deliberation, I agreed to receive Ethan's letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, 3 pages of careful handwriting. He made no excuses for what he had done, though he did explain the cycle of violence that had shaped him. Richard had begun disciplining him when he was 8, using increasingly harsh methods as Ethan grew older. By the time I entered the picture, Ethan had been conditioned to believe that violence was normal, even necessary for proper development. "I'm not writing this to justify what I did," his letter concluded. "Nothing can justify hurting you that way. I'm writing because I want you to know that I am working to break this cycle. I will never hurt anyone like that again. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope one day you can find peace." I didn't reply immediately. The letter stirred up complicated emotions, still anger, but also a new understanding of how Ethan had been shaped by the same toxic environment that had nearly destroyed me. In the quiet of my new bedroom, where I knew I was safe, I began to see that forgiveness might not be a gift I gave him, but something I did for myself. News of my mother came through more official channels. She had filed for divorce from Richard, moved into a small apartment, and was steadily attending both individual therapy and parenting classes. Her supervised visits with me began awkwardly, both of us unsure how to interact without Richard's oppressive presence dictating our roles. "I failed you," she said, during our 3rd visit, finally addressing the elephant in the room. "I was supposed to protect you, and instead I became part of what hurt you." "Why did you stay?" I asked the question that had haunted me for years. "Why did you let it happen to us?" She didn't have a simple answer, only the complex reality of fear, financial dependence, eroded self-esteem, and the way abuse escalates so gradually that each new level becomes normalized. "I thought I was keeping things from getting worse," she explained. "I believed if I could just be perfect enough, do everything right, he wouldn't get angry. When that failed, I thought if I could at least direct his anger toward me instead of you kids, I was doing my job as a mother." She wiped away a tear. "I was wrong. So terribly wrong." Forgiveness did not come quickly or easily. It came in small moments over months of visits as I watched my mother reclaim her own identity and acknowledge her failings without excuses. She did not demand forgiveness or push for my healing to assuage her own guilt. She simply showed up, consistently proving with actions rather than words that she was committed to changing. At the end of 8th grade, I received an award for academic achievement. As I looked out from the stage after accepting it, I saw Carol and Robert Miller clapping enthusiastically from one section of the auditorium, and a few rows behind them, sitting quietly, but smiling with unmistakable pride, was my mother. That summer, just before starting high school, I made a decision that surprised even me. With Dr. Rivera's guidance and the full support of the Millers, I asked if I could visit Ethan at the juvenile facility. The meeting was arranged with counsellors present in a neutral room with comfortable chairs and a window overlooking a small garden. Ethan had changed physically. His once athletic frame had thinned his expression less arrogant. When I entered, he stood but did not approach me, respecting the boundaries we had set beforehand. "Thanks for coming," he said simply. We talked for 45 minutes, mostly not about the past, but about the present. His therapy, my new home, the books we were reading, his plans to complete his GED. Near the end, he asked the question I could see had been weighing on him. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I considered my answer carefully. "I'm working on it," I told him honestly. "Not for you, but for me. Holding on to hate takes too much energy that I need for healing." He nodded, accepting this partial answer, as if it were more than he had a right to expect. As I prepared to leave, he said one more thing. "I'm proud of you, Chloe, for being stronger than all of us." High school began as a fresh start. Few of my new classmates knew my history, and those who did respected my privacy. I joined the debate team, discovering a talent for articulating arguments clearly and persuasively. My English teacher encouraged me to consider a future in law or psychology fields, where I could help others who had experienced traumas similar to my own. The Millers officially invited me to stay with them until graduation, an offer I accepted with gratitude and relief. Though my mother continued to make progress and our relationship was slowly mending, we both recognized that the stability of my foster placement was invaluable to my continued progress. For my 16th birthday, Carol and Robert gave me a journal bound in soft leather, nothing like the belt that had once been used to hurt me. Inside the cover, Carol had written, "Your story matters. All of it, the pain and the healing. Someday it might light the way for someone else who is lost in the dark." That night, for the first time, I began to write my full story. Not just the trauma, but the recovery, the rebuilding of a life I once thought was permanently broken. With every page, I reclaimed a piece of my narrative from those who had tried to silence me. 10 years have passed since the night my brother beat me with a belt until I collapsed. I am 28 now, with a master's degree in psychology and a career counselling survivors of domestic violence. The scars on my back have faded to thin, silvery lines visible only if you know to look for them. The emotional scars have softened too, though. Certain triggers can still occasionally transport me back to that basement. My office is intentionally designed to feel safe, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, no weight benches or equipment that might remind clients of places where they were hurt. On my desk sits a small sculpture of a phoenix rising from the ashes, a gift from the Millers when I graduated from college. "Where did you find the strength?" these clients often ask me. "How did you move on?" The answer is both simple and complex. I moved on because standing still was not an option. I found strength because the alternative was to surrender to a story written by my abusers. But I didn't do it alone. Every step of my journey was supported by others who believed in my worth when I couldn't see it myself. Mrs. Thompson, the gym teacher who noticed what others missed and acted instead of looking away. The Diaz and then the Miller families who showed me what family should be. Dr. Rivera, who guided me through the labyrinth of trauma with unflagging patience. Sarah, my guardian ad litem, who fought for my rights in court. These people formed a safety net that caught me when I fell and a ladder that helped me climb toward healing. My mother and I have forged a new relationship, one built on honesty instead of fear. She completed her therapy, maintained her sobriety after a brief turn to alcohol during the divorce, and eventually became an advocate for domestic violence awareness. She speaks to women's groups about recognizing the warning signs she missed or ignored. "I can't change what happened to you," she told me once, "but I can help make sure it doesn't happen to someone else's child." Richard served 4 years in prison for child endangerment and domestic battery. Upon his release, he moved to another state. "We have no contact, a boundary I established and have maintained. Some wounds are best healed by distance." Ethan's path has been more complicated. After 3 years in juvenile detention with intensive therapy, he earned his GED and eventually a bachelor's degree in social work. Today, he works with at-risk youth, specifically boys who show early signs of violence. We communicate occasionally via email and have met in person a few times. Our relationship will never be normal, but it has evolved into something neither of us could have imagined during the dark years in that house. "The belt scarred both of us," he said during our last meeting, "just in different ways." The most powerful lesson I have learned through all of this is that cycles can be broken. The violence that shaped my childhood did not have to define my future. I made a conscious choice to end that pattern, to build a life founded on compassion instead of control, communication instead of fear. This doesn't mean forgetting what happened. Indeed, remembering is crucial. My experiences inform my work every day, allowing me to recognize pain in others that might otherwise remain hidden. But to remember without being consumed by the memory is a delicate balance, one I work on daily. Sometimes I think about that moment in the courtroom when the evidence of my injuries was displayed, the silence that fell as everyone confronted the reality of what had been done to a child in the name of discipline. That silence represented a collective recognition that this was wrong, unarguably, undeniably wrong. Justice did land harder than any belt. Not through vengeance or punishment, but through acknowledged truth, recognized harm, and enacted healing. The system that so often fails vulnerable children worked for me, in large part, because adults like Mrs. Thompson and Sarah refused to look away or take the easier path. Today, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of bluebonnets blows through my open office window. Outside, children are laughing in the park across the street. Their sounds a joyful reminder of the carelessness that every child deserves. A new client is sitting across from me, a young woman named Maya, whose eyes hold the heavy weight of a secret she is only just beginning to tell. She tells a story of closed doors, angry whispers, and the creeping fear that has become her constant companion. As she speaks, I listen not just with the ears of a therapist, I listen with my own scars. "I feel so weak," she whispers, twisting the hem of her sweater, "like it's my fault." "It's not your fault, Maya," I say gently, and I believe the words with every fibre of my being. The weakness is in staying silent. You are here. You are talking. That is strength. And I don't share my full story with every client, but sometimes a small piece of it can become a bridge. I tell her about a little girl who once believed her worth was measured by how invisible she could be. I tell her that that girl learned that her voice, however shaky at first, had the power to break down walls. I see a flicker of recognition in Maya's eyes, the relief of knowing she is not alone. This is why I do this work, to light that fire. After my session, I walk through the park, watching the families enjoying the sunny afternoon. I see a father patiently teaching his daughter how to throw a softball, his voice full of encouragement. I see a mother kissing the scraped knee of her young son. These simple, ordinary acts of love once seemed foreign to me, like a language from another country. Now they are evidence of the world I have chosen to build for myself. My phone buzzes. It's my mother. "Just calling to see how your day was, honey," she says, her voice warm and free of the fear that once laced it. We talk for a while about my work, about her gardening class, about a new recipe she tried. A normal, beautiful conversation. Our road to get here was long and difficult, paved with the broken pieces of our past, but we walked it together. Later, I receive an email with the subject line, "A cycle broken." It's from Ethan. He's written to tell me that one of the young men in his program, a boy with a history of violent outbursts, was just accepted into a local trade school. He was the first in his family to graduate from high school. I told him a piece of our story, Ethan wrote. No details, just that it's possible to change, that our past doesn't have to be our prison. I think he heard me. Thank you, Chloe, for showing me it was possible. As the sun begins to set, painting the Austin sky in shades of orange and purple, I return to my apartment. It's a quiet space filled with light and books. There are no harsh rules, no heavy footsteps on the stairs, no menacing silences. Sometimes on quiet nights, when I am alone with my thoughts, I can feel the ghost of my scars. They don't hurt anymore. Instead, they are a reminder. They remind me of the price of silence and the power of truth. They are a map of where I have been and a testament to how far I have come. I was once a little girl, beaten down in a dark basement, told to be grateful for scraps. Now I am a woman who stands in the light, helping others find their own way out of the darkness. The belt may have left its marks on my skin, but it is the resilience, the compassion, and the voice I found in its aftermath that have truly defined who I am. My scars no longer tell a story of pain, they tell a story of survival. They are not marks of weakness, but evidence of strength. Forged in pain, they now shine with silver, reflecting not the darkness of the past, but the promise of a healed future. And that is a story worth telling.